Yeah.
I'm going to stand up there. Welcome to the Jaffrey Civic Center. This is the fourth in a series called Stories to Share. And I see repeat offenders here, and perhaps a few new people. And a couple of inches of snow are not going to shut down this program.
Oh, don't worry, it's okay.
All right. We started this program in October, and Tori McCagg talked about living off the grid. Then Bob King talked about hydropower, and then Heather Ames, who's here, spoke about international adoption and connecting adoptees with their culture. And so here we have the fourth, and again, a topic quite diverse from previous topics. And our speaker is Bob Beck. First, I want to say that Rebecca Fredrickson lives in the part of the state that had a lot more snow than we did and is participating online. She is the executive director of the Civic Center. Second, Sean Driscoll is our IT person. Thank you, Sean. Beltetz sponsors this program, but we'll have to give them a refund because this time we are going without treats. But you're allowed to socialize afterwards if you wish without treats. We decided that we would have equality between those of you who are here and the 37 people who are joining us online. My name is Joe Steinfeld, and I am the moderator of this series. Bob Beck spent 35 years traveling the globe, serving the United States, working largely in embassies in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. He's got lots of academic credentials and a wealth of experience in what it is like to live throughout the world. And though he is a man of the world, he now lives in Peterborough, having retired in 2017 and moving of all things to Ankara, Turkey. But he had a good reason to do that. His wife, Meg, who is here, was in the Foreign Service, and that's where she was. So they spent some time together in Turkey and then moved to the Monadnock region, where Bob, I think, has set a record in terms of the speed with which he has become a mainstay of the community, teaching at Keene State in the CALL program and otherwise showing what it means to be a good citizen. He is not known for great timing, however, because he just happened to be in the embassy in Damascus when it was attacked by terrorists. And that was in 2006. Or maybe your timing was good because that gives you today's subject. I'm very happy that Bob is here and will tell us what it was like to be in the room.
You just took my speech, Joe. So Joe's trying to make it a little more difficult by taking my speech. First of all, thank you to all the people who came out on this rather New England evening. I appreciate you taking the time and showing your interest. Also, thank you to everybody out in Zoom land. for participating. A special thanks to the Jaffrey Civic Center for hosting this event, to Becca and Sean, and of course to Joe for his very, very warm and kind introduction. As Joe mentioned, my wife and I spent 29 out of 30 years overseas, from 1990 to 2020. And we served in embassies in Europe, in the Balkans, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Middle East, and in Asia. And oftentimes when people hear that we have this overseas background, one of the questions they ask is, what did you like most about being overseas? And I have two standard answers. Number one, because an army runs on its stomach, is food. I love the food overseas. Number two, the stories. And when Joe told me about this, this series and asked if I'd be interested in participating, there's a host of stories that from our time overseas that that I think would be appropriate. But the story that I'm going to tell you tonight is fairly condensed. It is exciting. It's fun in some ways. Yeah, explosions aren't always fun, but it also helps to remind people that there are men and women out there serving in dangerous areas. So before I start the story, though, I'd like to mention that serving overseas for 20 or 30 years, you're going to run into something like this. It may not be a terrorist attack, maybe a typhoon, maybe a civil war or something. So our story is not that unique in the sense of being an interesting story. The terrorism part, yes, it's unique. But I have friends right here in the area who served for 20 years overseas with an NGO in some very interesting places. They have interesting stories. I have a friend who I play tennis with. He was an officer on a naval submarine. I'm sure he's got some good stories. I have government friends out here, retired government friends in Zoom land who served in the Middle East during the Arab Spring, who served in Southeast Asia during political upheaval. So if you spend 20 or 30 years overseas, you're going to run into some interesting stories. Nevertheless, it was just after 10 o'clock in the morning on 12 September 2006 when we felt the first explosion in the US Embassy in Damascus. And when I say felt, I mean felt. We heard it. We definitely heard it. There's no mistaking an explosion. But I was in my office on the top floor of the embassy in the communications area. And I looked into our communications room and I saw the big metal racks swaying back and forth from the force of the explosion. At the time, at about the same time that the explosion went off, John, yeah. The embassy alarm system, it's called select tone. And it's basically just speakers in all the offices where the Marines from their post down at post 1 can inform the embassy community that, hey, we've got an intruder, or hey, blah, 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 whatever.
Duck and cover. Get away from the windows. Take cover and await further instructions.
So that's a cute way of showing what we actually heard. Obviously, we didn't see the little teddy bear or whatever, but that's what we heard at about the same time that we heard and felt the first explosion.
Sorry. Pardon me, that's the autoplay of YouTube.
So we hear and feel this explosion. We hear the duck and cover on the embassy alarm system called the select tone. We immediately knew that something bad was happening. We didn't know exactly what was happening because, unfortunately, the select tone system, the embassy alarm system, after about 10 seconds, cut out, stopped working, right? Murphy's Law just stopped. But we had this first big explosion. So our immediate response was myself and one other of my office members. We went out into the common area on the 3rd floor of the embassy. We served in what's called the PCC, the Post Communication Center. It's where the communications offices are and the technical support offices are. And we went out into the common area, and colleagues from the other offices did the same thing. Basically, everybody went out there and said, what is going on? And about the time we got out there, we heard another explosion. Not as loud, but more importantly, we heard bullets pinging off the outside of the embassy, and lots of them. So we knew all of a sudden, and I'll never forget this, because we all looked at each other and we all at about the same time said, we're under attack, we're under attack. And it was like out of some bad movie, because we all turned around and started to run back into our offices. And I ran to the door of the office and I stopped and I said, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. I'm supposed to do something. And I turned around and I looked and I realized that the vault door and the Post Communication Center was behind a vault door, because it's the communications area. It's a very, very critical part of the embassy. So we had a vault door. That vault door was open during the day, right? But I knew that I had to close the vault door, because if we were under attack, and it was clear that we were under attack, those in the PCC, those that were responsible for the communications equipment and all of the classified stuff that went with it, we were responsible for that. And that vault door gave us another 40 minutes if terrorists got onto the compound. So I went back out towards the exterior of the building, and this time it's bing, 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 there were bullets pinging off the outside of the building. And I went back out and I closed the vault door and locked the vault door. And we had a procedure in place, and most embassies do, when you have a vault door, the first person in the morning, when they open the vault door, they then go through a series of procedures, and I'm not going to try to explain it, but basically they lock the vault door open so that if you ever have to close it quickly, boom, it locks. In other words, you don't have to mess with spinning the dial or any of that stuff. You just close it and boom, it locks. And thankfully, one of my officers, who was very Germanic or Swiss, in that she followed the rules, she had done that morning when she opened the PCC. So all I had to do is I ran to the vault door, or went out into the hallway, pulled the vault door, closed it. It locks. We're good. So, so this was 2 minutes in. We felt the explosion. There were more explosions. There was gunfire, and we did not have an embassy alarm system. It just died immediately. Now, quick, so you have a framework for, in my office at that time, there were only 3 PCSers. There were only 3 permanent party people. We also had a couple TDYers, what we call, which is temporary duty officers, people who come to support the embassy. And unfortunately, well, fortunately for us, probably unfortunately for him, there was an Army NCO who worked downstairs in the Defense Attaché office, but who had a communications background, and he would come up sometime to talk to us and work with us a bit. He happened to be in our office at that time. So by closing the vault door, I closed him into our office, essentially. And again, when the vault door was closed, the whole floor was secure, if you will. So all the offices were behind the vault door. So that was the situation as it started. Now, can we go to slide 3, please? I want to give you an idea. This is a map, as you can see. To overstate the obvious, this is a map. But I wanted to give you an idea that if you look at that where it says United States of America Embassy, it almost looks like a teacup area. That was the whole compound. Okay, we had a fairly sizable compound. It was the better side, the better part of an embassy, of a city block. It was not downtown like in the commercial. It was in a mixed commercial residential area of Damascus. But you see where the front gate is, see where the back gate is. The embassy cars were along that street in front of the embassy. And that blue L is the building that we were in. Okay, it's called the Chancery Building in an embassy, which is kind of the main building where the ambassador has his office and where some of the other main offices are. It tends to be the most secure building in the embassy compound because that's where you have the Marines, and that's where you have offices that deal in classified information, etc. Now, right up from the arrow that says front gate, in other words, right basically in front of the Chancery Building is where the car pulled up with the terrorists. And there were actually 2 cars, but the main attack came at the front gate, okay? There was 1 car with 3 terrorists in it. They drove right up to the front gate, basically, right up to the front door, just beyond the front door, got out and threw a satchel bomb at the front door. That was the first big explosion that basically kind of shook the building. And then they started shooting and they started throwing grenades, etc. At the same time, unbeknownst to us, okay, so I'm telling you things now that we didn't know until after the attack ended. At the same time, a small like delivery van crashed into the back gate. We didn't know, okay, but I'll come back to that later, just so you get a sense of where we were. And you can stay with that, but there'll be some pictures later that I'll explain how close that first car was to our building. Because now when you think of embassy compounds, you think this Fortress America, right? Where you have 200 feet of setback and everything. We did not have that in Damascus in 2006. Literally, there was a little guardrail on the street, and there was a sidewalk from the guardrail to the wall of the embassy, and from the wall of the embassy to the Chancery Building where we were working was about 10, 12 feet. So we were about 20 feet back from where this car pulled up. Okay. All right. So back to this whole concept of the select tone, the embassy alarm system going down. We had, in military parlance, no situational awareness. In other words, boom, explosion. We go out into PCC and all of a sudden we hear all these bullets and other explosions, and we're saying, well, we're under attack. This is serious. But we didn't have the Marine telling us, you know, get under your desk, do this, go to this area, anything. Basically, we were on our own, in a way, all right? So back to the actual attack. After I shut the vault door, I run back into my office and everybody's going, we're under attack, what do we do? And I remember saying to myself, you have to slow down. It's one of the things I said is I have to slow down because I was in charge of the office and I had to make sure that the instructions that I gave, the decisions that I made were in a very, very dynamic, crazy situation as well thought out as possible. And obviously, you're going to make some mistakes or whatever, but I just remember telling myself, slow down. And one of the first things that I was hit with when I got into the office is one of my officers said, should we go to emergency destruction? And for all those who have ever worked in an embassy, one of the nightmares, a nightmare scenario is having to do emergency destruction. And by emergency destruction, basically, if you're in an office that has classified material or classified equipment, you have to destroy it, and you have to destroy it fast, so that if the bad guy actually gets in there, he or she or it or whatever does not get our secrets, right? That's one of the number one responsibilities. So obviously we knew we were under attack. We didn't know how many people, we didn't know anything about the externals of that attack. We just knew we were under attack. So one of my officers said, should we go to emergency destruct? And I took a step back, kind of figuratively, and said, well, wait a minute. We had power. I mean, I literally, okay, the lights are on, the air conditioning's working. So let's hold on here. I think I picked up the phone. We had a dial tone. I said, okay, hold on. And at that time, and I'm not going to go into the procedures of emergency destruction, et cetera, because even though I'm 5 years retired, I still have an obligation to maintain, you know, that secrets are secrets, whether you're retired or not. Anyway, we chose, I directed not to go to emergency destruction. So now kind of some of the lighter side of this in a way, I had one of the TDYers was a kind of a grizzled veteran of the Middle East. And he was one of these guys, a rover, he TDY'd a lot. And he came up to me pretty much right away and we heard this boom, and this was one of the subsequent explosions. And he looks at me and he said, you know, Bob, that sounds like a mortar. And I remember looking at him and I remember saying, Joe, who in God's name is going to be mortaring us in the middle of Damascus? That makes no sense at all. In reality, it was not a mortar, right? But Joe, as I said, he was kind of a grizzled veteran. He immediately said to me, we need to make sure all our people are here. And at that time, we had one permanent party person who was leaving. He was getting ready to PCS, to go back to Washington. He was not in the office that morning. So I had Joe call him real quickly, because we had everybody's phone numbers. We had like old cell phones. And he called this guy and said, you know, we're under attack here. Where are you? Well, I'm in a cafe 4 blocks away or whatever. Do you need me to come in? No. One of the things in counterterrorism training, and you get a lot of it in the government, is if there is an attack, the number one thing you want to do is get off what they say the X. Get off the X. In other words, get off the point of attack. Well, we obviously couldn't do that because we were in the embassy compound. That was being attacked. But I immediately said, no. Tell him if it's safe where he's at to stay there. If not, go home. Do not come to the embassy. Now, about the same time, I realized I need to contact Washington, right? Because as in any bureaucracy, if you don't tell your chain of command, then it's not really happening, right? And knowledge is power, information is power. So I had to get in touch with Washington. And I had a very young officer, very sharp young guy. And he was standing next to our phone, that it was a classified phone that we could call back to the op center. And I turned to him and I said, Chris, call DC, tell them we're under attack. So he picks up the phone and does a speed dial for the op center. And he says, This is Damascus. This is Damascus. We're under attack. We're under attack. I looked at him and I said, unknown number of assailants, grenades, small arms fire. Unknown number of assailants, grenades, small arms fire. And I looked at him and I said, Chris, calm down. He says, calm down. And he hangs up the phone. So you know, it's one of the, so Joe comes up to me and he said, Bob, maybe you should call Washington. So I got on the phone right away and I called right back. And the guy at the other end basically says, what in God's name is going on out there? And I quickly told him what we knew, which wasn't much, right? Because at the time I didn't have access to that. You didn't have to show the map, but I didn't have access to that. I didn't know there were 2 cars out there and there were 4 assailants, blah, blah, blah. I just knew that we were under attack, right? So anyway, that it was a funny story in an otherwise very kind of traumatic situation. So, so that was about, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes into the attack. And the whole attack only lasted about 20 or 25 minutes. So this whole story is about 25 minutes. But I mean, it's an interesting 25 minutes, I'll say that. Now, can you put up the map of Syria? Real quick, I'd like to give you a little background on, I think it's in that second slide. Yeah. So for those of you who are not familiar with Syria, I mean, Syria is a, you know, a very old, it was created at the end of World War I. But Damascus has been around forever. I believe a street called Straight is the one street that is named in the Bible, I think. That's what they always said. But the background I want to give you is this is 2006. This is 5 years after 9/11 and 3 years after the United States invasion of Iraq. And the reason I bring this up, and those of you who know me from my Keene State teaching know that 9/11 in my mind is a turning point. And you can almost draw a line from 9/11 to this particular terrorist attack. Because at the time in 2006, the United States and Syria basically did not have, or the state of our bilateral relations was about as bad as you can get and still have embassies in the country. We did not have an ambassador. We had a charge d'affaires. There was a lot of animosity over Syrian support for Hezbollah in the summer of 2006 when they had the second Lebanon war with Israel. Also, there was a lot of suspicion within the Bush administration that the Syrian regime was actually helping the development of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And this was right at the time when Al-Qaeda in Iraq started to prosper, if you will. It's basically the nadir of US military operations in Iraq. It was right before the surge. Iraq was a mess. And at that time, in Syria, there were approximately 1.2 million Iraqi refugees, which had a very detrimental effect on the Syrian economy. There was a lot of, I think, Syrian, especially among the Sunni Muslims in Syria, there was a lot of sympathy for the Iraqis. And so I just want to provide a backdrop that this attack did not happen in a vacuum. And again, those who have studied with me at Keene State know that I'm big on things don't happen in a vacuum, right? And as you can see, if you can see, can you zoom it out a bit, please? Yeah, that's great. You can see the border between Syria and Iraq there. It is actually, I wrote this down, I think it's like 370 miles. It's a huge border. It's almost impossible to defend, if you will, in the sense of, you know, they have border guards and they have border crossings, but it's easy to get across. Yes, 372 miles. So that's the backdrop for the attack, is that it was a very difficult time in US-Syrian relations. The United States, obviously in the Middle East at that time, was not the most popular country in the world. That's a historical way and a political way of saying that it's not that big of a surprise that the U.S. Embassy in Damascus was attacked, I think, okay? All right, so back to the attack. After we had talked to DC, after we had made the decision about not going to emergency destruct, we started to prepare some things for emergency destruct. We made sure that our equipment was all, our emergency destruct toolkit. In other words, you had these big hammers and stuff to beat on things if you had to beat on things, was all ready to go, but we did not start that. So about 10 or 12 minutes in, the Army NCO comes up to me and he said, Bob, we just had weapons shipped into next door. They're in the pouch vault. And at this time, we have no idea. We had no situation. We don't know if terrorists are on the compound or whatever. And I'm very honest, I'm not a weapons person. I don't like weapons. But I said, okay. And he obviously was qualified. And one of my personnel, the TDY, or the older gentleman who had been through the Middle East, and he went into Iraq with the first diplomatic team and all this type of stuff, he happened to be weapons qualified. So I told the Army guy, I said, okay, go get 2 weapons. So off he goes with one of my other guys to go get the weapons. And in the meantime, I called back to DC. I called DC about every 5 minutes just to kind of say, yeah, things are still blowing up. No changes. Not sure what's going on. Everybody in the office is fine. We're safe. Still got power, blah, blah, blah. So just, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes later, the Army NCO and my other officer come in. They each have an M4, which is the modern version of M16. And the Army guy walks straight up to me and he says, Bob, we got a problem. And I'm looking at him saying, well, we just got 2 M4s. I think, maybe we've got a little better chance. They didn't ship any ammo. So back to Murphy's Law. Murphy raised his head a couple times there. So, I mean, it was, what are you going to do? So, so about that time, well, the Army NCO said to me, he said, I'm not doing anything up here. I got to get back to DAO because I know we have weapons down in DAO. So I can at least go down there. And if the Marines need help, I can help. I said, okay, but that means we've got to open the vault door. And again, we don't know. We have no situational awareness. We don't know if there are 10 terrorists on the compound. We just have no idea. So, but nevertheless, I said, okay, makes sense. You're not doing any good up here. So we went, him and I, and we go out into the common area, and the vault door had a little pinhole, like in a hotel room, right, that you could look out, but it was all fogged up and I couldn't see it. He looks out, I look out, I don't know, there could be an elephant out there and I wouldn't know. So, I mean, you take chances, right? And so I opened the vault door and the vault door swung out. So I opened the vault door and there was a small metal shelving unit, just about 2 shelves high, right against the wall that one of the officers was getting rid of or something. And the Army NCO, instead of just barreling down the stairs, he goes out and he kicks the metal shelving unit over, and it boom, 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 bounces, and it makes this terrible racket. And then he waits about 10 seconds. He didn't hear anything. Boom, he went downstairs. He took off. And I didn't really understand it initially, and then I got to think, well, he was trying to create a diversion to see if anybody was, if there were bad guys in the hallway. And when he waited and nobody shot, off he went. So he goes downstairs. I close the vault door again. I lock it, do the magic, lock it. And about that time, two of my guys are coming out of the pouch vault because they took the weapons back. There's no point of having weapons if you don't have ammo. So they take the weapons back and they say, you know, Bob, it sounds like we hear the Marines in there. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. So we went in, and the one guy that was in the pouch vault area, he was kind of shell-shocked. He was sitting there and he was watching CNN already reporting on the attack. And I said, what are you doing? And then I heard the Marines. And I'm saying, and I heard the Marines on a radio. And I said, you've got a radio in here? Oh yeah, we got a radio. It's back behind, it's over here. I said, well, now it's no longer your radio, it's our radio. And I went and I just took the radio and it was in a charging thing, and I put it out in the common area and let the other officers know that, hey, now at least we have a radio, so we know what the Marines are doing. And then we started kind of rotating people out there to listen to the radio at least. Because I thought about calling the Marine during this thing to say, hey, Gunny, you know, you hear these explosions. But obviously you don't do that because the Marines, they're our first line of defense. Well, the first line of defense are the Syrian military guys outside, and the embassy guards, the local guards, they're the first line of defense. Then if you get onto the compound, your line of defense, our line of defense are the Marines, okay? And some embassy security personnel who are also armed. So this was about 20 minutes in, and we finally had some situational awareness, but we still didn't have a clear view of, okay, are there 3 guys on the compound, nobody on the compound? We didn't really know. And again, I wasn't gonna get on, this is Bob up in the PCC, what's going on? Because by that time we knew that, well, there was still a gun battle going on. But so our situational awareness improved considerably, but not to 100%, fairly late in the attack. So as the attack wound down, and it finally did wind down, it took about 25 minutes, and it literally wound down for us by sound or lack thereof. We no longer heard explosions. We no longer heard gunfire. Although late in the attack, there was a large explosion, probably the biggest explosion we heard. And I'll get to that a little later when we, let's see what, go to the next slide, please. The next one. Yeah. So that is after the attack. That's the front door of the embassy. But the attack just basically, from our perspective, stopped. And again, it was by sound. Now, I waited about 5 minutes, and everybody was, you know, kind of breathing deeply, sighs of relief that it sounds like this is over. However, we didn't know. We didn't know if, we still didn't have 100% clarification if there were terrorists on the compound. Could they maybe have somebody hostage? We didn't know. But I waited about 5 minutes. And then I called the gunny. And the gunny was he's the gunny sergeant, the Marine. He's head of the Marine security detachment. So he's the senior Marine. Because I wanted to go up on the roof because we had communications, we had our transmission antenna up there, and we had other like power infrastructure and stuff that was really critical to embassy communications. And I wanted to make sure that things were okay. Plus, Joe, the grizzled old veteran, was a smoker, and he made it very clear to me that he needed a cigarette. And you didn't smoke inside, and the place where he went was upstairs because it was only 1 floor up, as opposed to going down 3 floors to go outside in front of the building. He would just go upstairs. So I said, okay, calm down, calm down. Anyway, I called the gunny and I said, Gunny, you know, it's Bob up at PCC, I need to get up on the roof. And he said, well, Bob, there is an unexploded VBIED at the back gate. VVID being military speak for car bomb. And I said, okay, Gunny, I'll stay in the office. No problem. No worries. But I said, if you could let me know. And we had the radio by then. So we had, as I said, we had a semblance of what was going on. But he did confirm to me that there were nobody on the compound. There was no terrorists on the compound. So, so he, about 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, and I had called back to DC again and said, hey, you know, it looks like it's over. We're still waiting for the handling of a car bomb at the back gate. And then we're gonna hopefully get up on the roof and we'll figure out what else we need to do. Now we finally did get up on the roof. The gunny called me back about 10 minutes later and he said, the Syrians have just wheeled the car bomb away. It's gone. Okay, good. So we went up on the roof and one of my, can you go back to the first slide? An image that is seared in my brain from this, the searing, the swaying communications racks, is basically this is not my picture, but that is the Marine who was up on the flagpole. And we went up on the roof and he's up on the flagpole and he's got his M4 and he looks back down at us because the flagpole was up a little farther, a little higher. And he's in gym shorts and his full body armor. Because basically when the alarm went down, he was probably sleeping or whatever because they work 24/7, blah, blah, blah. So this is not a very good picture of it because I got it off the internet. Suffice it to say, even though I'm an avid photographer, I didn't get to take any family portraits or any shots that day. So all of the pictures you're seeing are from the internet, from news reports about that attack. But I remember looking up and seeing that Marine and saying, and we could smell all the gunpowder and I looked over the side of the embassy and all the Syrian soldiers were down there and everything. I mean, it was just kind of a surreal scene. And then we found some stuff on the embassy roof. Right then, I found some stuff that I actually brought home with me and you'll see that in a couple of minutes. Now, again, with the attack finishing, that didn't mean our job was done, so to speak. And in 2004, I had gone TDY. We were in Paris at the time, which we weren't too worried about terrorist attacks there, but I had gone TDY on a temporary assignment down to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia for 3 or 4 weeks. And there was a lot of concern at that time about terrorism in Saudi Arabia because of 9/11, because of a lot of things. Well, we didn't have any problem when I was there, but about 3 weeks after I came back to Paris, the embassy compound, the consulate compound was attacked in Jeddah. And I had called up the guys that I had worked with in Jeddah the next day and talked to them about it. And they gave me some background on what happened. And it was just terrible. But one of the things that I learned from that, because somebody had said from the Jeddah attack that you need to make sure that your family members are aware right away of what happened, so that they don't get the news via the news, so to speak. And so one of the first things I did is I told I got all my troops together and said, okay, I want each of you to call to a trusted loved one back in the States and tell them what happened and have them call the rest of your family, particularly any family members that you may be concerned about. Because what I didn't want happen was an elderly grandparent or something to get up at 6 o'clock in, wherever, Podunk, America, turn on CNN and say, oh my God, Jimmy's embassy got blowed up or whatever. I wanted somebody to actually call and say, Mom, Grandma, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Bill, whatever, that there's been an attack in Damascus. Jimmy's fine. Everything's okay. You might not hear from him for a day or so, but everything's And I was thinking about myself and my own family too, because my mother was 85 at that time and in failing health. And I knew that pretty much in the morning she'd turn on the news. And the last thing I wanted was for her to, see this and not know what was going. So I called my brother, my point man in the family, my brother in DC, and explained what happened. He called everybody. I called my daughter, who was in college at McGill at the time. And I called my wife's sister so that her family was aware of what happened. Now, a couple more things before I end. This was an extremely, interesting, exciting, searing moment in our career. But we got off pretty easy, to be perfectly honest. There were no Americans killed. The attackers were killed. A Syrian soldier was killed. I believe a Syrian civilian was killed out in front of the embassy who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But no Americans were killed. But I think that it's appropriate to mention that even though we got off easy, there's a lot of other of our colleagues overseas who haven't got off easy. And this is for many years, right? 1983, Beirut. In the 1980s and 90s in Athens. The twin bombings in East Africa, Benghazi. So I'm not saying that the diplomatic or the foreign policy community is more dangerous than being a military person. It is not by any stretch of the imagination. Yet there still are brave men and women out there serving our country. And not all of your tours are, pâté in Paris. Okay. So the real quick couple things that happened right after the attack is the embassy had decisions to make. One, should we evacuate the embassy? And now I'm talking tactical and strategic. Tactically, we evacuated the embassy very quickly. All non-essential personnel within about a half hour were gone. My wife, boom, she was out. Most of the embassy was gone. I stayed, my office stayed, because basically the people who stay are security folks, people who know what's going on, communications folks, because you have to be able to contact DC, and the leadership of the embassy, obviously. Now, you remember I talked about emergency destruct, and the procedure for emergency destruct is that it's the chief of mission, basically the ambassador or the chargé d'affaires. Whoever's in charge in the mission is the one who says, go to emergency destruct now. Our problem is that we didn't know, since we had no embassy communication system, we didn't know who was in charge. It turns out that the chargé, there was no ambassador at the time. The chargé was out of the building. The deputy chief of mission, who was second in charge, was out of the building. So technically, a political officer was in charge. And he was, I found out later, under a table in his office for the entire thing. The security officer, the embassy security officer, called the RSO, the regional security officer, wasn't in the building. He was homesick. So it came out later, and we had all these after action meetings, and it came out later. I said, well, I was prepared to order my office to go to emergency destruct. And the security guys, well, you can't do that, and there was a lot of pushback against him to say, well, ultimately, I had responsibility for that material and that equipment. And I would have made that decision. Now, having said all that, I still had communications to DC. So I could call back to the Ops Center and say, hey, it's getting really bad. I think I'm going to go, give me some top cover here. And they would have. I'm sure they would have. And the other issue, so the other issue was, should the embassy community evacuate? In other words, should we send family members home because of this attack? And there was a lot of back and forth, embassy meetings, and the State Department has two separate types of departures. One is called authorized, and it's a voluntary departure. Basically, they say, Kate, if you and your family want to go home, we'll pay for you to go home for 2 months or blah, blah, blah. Okay? And there are stipulations, there are regulations, but basically it's, you know, it's a bit dangerous here. You might want to go, you might want to cool off in the States for a couple of months. And the other one is ordered, which means all non-essential personnel, all dependents, boom, you're out of here. So there was a lot of back and forth in the embassy, in the senior level meetings in the embassy, and it was decided just to go to the voluntary. And very few people took it, to be perfectly honest. So, but as it turns out, can you go to the car slide? Because I mentioned the car bomb. That was the car outside the front gate. And they had, in the back of that thing, some kind of jerry-rigged propane tanks as bombs. And I will also say that the group that attacked us, and we never learned much about them because the Syrians never shared any information of them. They killed the first 3 in the gun battle. And the 4th one, who drove the truck into the back gate, he was arrested, and American personnel, we never got, as far as I know, the FBI never got to talk to him or anything. So we don't really know, other than they were Sunni extremists from a small town in Syria who were apparently radicalized by feelings of fealty to Al-Qaeda. But we don't know if there was any conspiracy, if there were more people out, we had no idea. But this is what the car looked like. And I actually, about a half hour after it, I went out on the street with one of my officers because her car was parked just around the corner and some of the embassy vehicles were damaged. And so I went out with her and we got in her car and started it to make sure, you know, we didn't know if they put bombs under it. So we started the car to make sure everything was fine. But this is what it looked like. I remember walking by this thing and saying, you know, my God, we were lucky. We were really lucky. And then I mentioned what I found on the roof of the embassy. Here's the last slide. So these are pieces of, the one on the left is what I believe, the biggest one, came from one of the canisters in the back of that vehicle. Because basically where we were on the roof was right 3 stories up, or 4 stories up, because we were on the roof, from where that car blew up. The 2 black ones, the one at the bottom and the one on the right, lower right, are, I believe, fragments from grenades. I have these. I literally picked these up that day or that afternoon on the embassy roof. I think I picked a couple of them up the first time we went up for Joe's smoke. But and then that's a 7.62 millimeter slug from a AK-47, most likely from Syrian military. Because again, when the guys got out and started to attack, the Syrian military responded, because we had lots of military people out all the time protecting us, right? But the Syrians did fight back. There's no doubt about that. Anyway, it was one story of many from 30 years overseas, and I hope you enjoyed it. You want me to stay here, or what do you, okay.
Well, thanks, Bob. And listening to your story, I could think of quite a few questions, and I'm sure the same is true of others. So we'll start in the room. Who would like to go first? Just raise your hand. Sir, stand up, please.
I'm just wondering, Bob, why did the emergency equipment fail so early? Did you ever find out why that happened?
I think it was Swiss built. Yeah, so the question is, did we ever find out why the emergency, the select tone system is what we call it, what we called it in the embassy. The emergency if you will, broadcast system within the embassy, why it failed. And I think the answer to that question is we don't know, because anybody who has served in an embassy, especially since 9/11, knows that duck and cover alarm, because embassies test it every month. And so you get used to hearing this, and then they go through the fire alarm, they go through all this stuff, and they test it for a reason. But I don't know that we ever, and it wasn't just our office, it was the whole system. It just blew. And I don't know, that's a good question, Paul.
Now, we've got 38 people online, and I don't see any
You want to see the chat?
Yeah.
It would,
on the chat line.
Yep, they haven't entered any questions yet.
Okay.
All right, the chat line is open. Who in the room had a question? Someone else? Yeah, Charlie.
Yeah, my question is, the interaction with the Marines.
Yes.
One, what is the protocol for that that's happening? And secondly, did the Marines actually engage the terrorists directly, or is that, are they more of a defensive position?
Okay, so I'll answer the second part of your question first.
What's the question?
I'm sorry, the question, it's a two-part question about the Marines and our engagement, what the procedures were for our engagement with the Marines during such a situation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the second part of his question was, did the Marines engage with the terrorists? So I'll start with the second part. And the answer to the second part is no. And the reason they did not is that their responsibility begins and ends with the actual walls of the embassy. So outside the embassy, it's the host country's security responsibility. Okay? So had anybody gotten onto the compound, then the Marines would have engaged. And the Defense Department personnel downstairs, who, unbeknownst to me, had weapons, we were commo guys, we didn't have weapons, right? I mean, we had 2 M4s for about 5 minutes. It looked real nice. But, you know, that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks, right? So, so the Marines did not engage. Number two, your first part of your question was, were there procedures for engaging with the Marines in a situation like this? Can you expound on that a little? I mean, there were, in certain aspects of an emergency situation, there were procedures. The Marines were our backup for emergency destruction. I talked a fair amount about emergency destruction because some offices, our office had a lot of computer equipment, commo equipment, right? And it's not easy to all of a sudden, you know, how are you going to destroy all this stuff? Take all these hard drives out, crash and bang. The Marines in an emergency situation could come up and help us. Whereas not other, you know, other folks in the embassy who weren't cleared for our area couldn't. But in terms of the security of the embassy, we did not engage with the Marines much. The security office in the embassy engaged every day. They were like this with the Marines. So, and I think we had one junior security officer who was on site on embassy compound during that time. So.
Yes, still no questions on the chat.
Okay.
The newspaper article. Can we see that newspaper article
Oh,
again,
yes,
Charlotte?
yeah, sure.
That was New York Times one. That's slide 2.
And that's it.
And
3 of the gunmen were killed, and a 4th was wounded. Who killed them?
Syrian security forces.
Were you aware of it at the time?
No, absolutely not. Nope. We were aware just by, you know, by ear that there was a gun battle going on. There was a lot of shooting going on. And we knew, I mean, we walked by these security guys every morning, You know, we knew that there was a lot of security out there. What we didn't realize, and this is an interesting aside, is that the Syrian security forces that were guarding the embassy, they had almost immediate, I mean, within about 5 minutes, I believe, they had reinforcements coming. Now, there was like a presidential compound that was pretty close to there, but that led some people in the embassy community to believe that the Syrians actually knew that the attack was going to happen. Because, and the logic is, or was, it was never proven. The logic was because Syria's status with the United States was so low that the Bush administration, they weren't on the axis of evil, but they were trying to get there, that type thing from the Bush administration. That the Syrians, Bashar al-Assad, would do something like that to make the Syrian regime look better in the eyes of America. So he knows about this attack. The attack happens. All of a sudden, he puts it down. Everybody's patting the Syrians on the back. It was never proven. Nobody really knows. So, but it was all Syrian security forces that were shooting at the attackers.
That sounds like a conspiracy theory.
Hey, America loves conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah, no, I love that.
We're good at that. So, but the other interesting thing here is, again, American officials never got to talk to the one who was wounded. And from my understanding is that we never got much cooperation from the Syrians on the security side or the FBI side at all about that attack.
No, over here. Go ahead.
Are there any?
I was wondering if the embassy was on high alert the day before, because that was the anniversary of September 11th, but then you breathe a sigh of relief the next day and then you get attacked.
So that's an interesting question, Fran. And I would say, yes, we were on high alert. I personally was not. This is an interesting aside as well. I was in Amman that day. I went to Amman for a day trip to the embassy in Amman because one of my bosses from DC was in the area and he wanted to talk to me. And because of the awful bilateral relationship between the United States of America and Syria at that time, it was very difficult to get visas. The Syrians were not giving a lot of visas out. So my boss couldn't get a visa, but he could go to Amman, and Amman was 2 hours away. So I drove down to Amman and saw him. And yeah, obviously everybody was dialed into 5th anniversary of 9/11. You know, Al-Qaeda it's a prime time to hit us. So yeah, when that day passed without anything, we kind of breathed a sigh of relief.
Here's a question online from,
Oh my God.
from somebody named Beck.
Oh, no.
Yes, Beck.
Oh, geez.
No relative?
No, that's my daughter, our daughter.
Well,
Go ahead.
Apparently, you never told her what prompted you to say to yourself, slow down when this attack began, and asking whether you had been trained in some particular way in dealing with the emergency, or was it something else? And I would add to that a question, a related question, which is, from the sound of it, I get the impression that there wasn't much preparation for such an attack.
Okay. So, regarding me and training, I think my daughter knows very well that I'm basically untrainable. So, no, we did get training. I mean, we ran drills in the embassy, but between you and me and the wall, most people just don't take it that seriously. Well, not going to happen to me, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea. But to her specific question, what I remember explicitly is when I came back in from shutting that vault door, and I realized that, yep, we're under attack. This is, you better sober up now because you got to have your come to Jesus moment, however you want to say it, that this is serious. And I came in and I got hit with about 3 different people saying, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that, Bob, we're under attack, we're under attack. And I just remember kind of saying, I've got to slow down because it was this overload. And I think that I was very fortunate that I had that, as I called him, crusty old guy who had been around, he'd been into Iraq already, and he was able to kind of say, you know, we need to make sure we know where all our people are. Okay, we got to call the one guy. Oh God, I got to call back to DC, blah, blah, blah. So we did have training, but it just, you can get all the training you want. But when stuff starts to blow up, it's just, it all goes out, because we had certain people, like the young guy he was a big guy in guns and all this, and he always came across as a real tough guy. At the beginning of the attack, he totally withered. You know, and he came around. I got in his face and told him to calm down, and we needed his blah, 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 and he calmed down. And then other people that you wouldn't expect that would be rock solid were rock solid. You don't know until something like that happens. And I will add that, I mean, I was scared. Everybody was scared. If something like that happens, you know, if somebody says they're not scared, they're either lying or they're doing some drugs that maybe I should consider doing. Anyway,
Right over here.
Yeah, so I'm interested.
Stand up, please.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Bob. It's such an interesting story. So there's this moment in Damascus that one day. I'm kind of interested in how it was bracketed by your time before that and after that. You know, as a person, as a family, as a part of the embassy. You know, like how much time and the experiences of that.
so that's a fascinating question. The question from Kate is basically how that experience kind of fit into our career, but also from a family standpoint. I don't know if it fit in greatly from a family standpoint because our daughter was already in college. So it wasn't as if we had to pull her out of high school or something because of that. But I think it's a very good question. Before that, we had not served. We had served in Bulgaria, which was kind of a tough place, but not a place where you're going to get blowed up, right? So after getting through that terrorist attack, and I had a different perspective, I would say. That's the one way it changed me, is that I viewed things from a different prism after that terrorist attack. And what I mean is that when there was a problem, when somebody came to me with a problem, hey, blah, 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 I would always say to myself, okay, is anybody going to die? No, nobody's shooting us. Okay, well, we can deal with this. In other words, it gave me perspective on what is really important in life. And you ask about bracketing our career. 4 years later, we went to Iraq. Both my wife and I took a tour in Iraq. And you might say, well, you're crazy, you know, but Syria was actually more dangerous than Iraq, I would argue, because in Iraq, we had 50,000 troops with us. It's not to say that it wasn't dangerous, it was, but that would be the subject of another talk. Anyway.
So Syria still felt very dangerous for the next 4 years?
Well, we were only there for another. So the other thing about the terrorist attack is we had been there 3 weeks.
Oh,
We had just got there and boom.
Yeah.
And so we spent the rest of our 2-year tour. We stayed. And yeah, it was tense. I mean, it was tense for a lot of reasons. I didn't worry that much about another terrorist attack after that. I was more worried about Israeli F-15s over Damascus. And I'm not against the Israelis. I'm just saying I was worried about a wider war in the Middle East, and we would be stuck in the middle of it. And how in the hell were we going to get out of there? I wasn't so worried about a terrorist attack because I kind of ascribed to the theory that, you know, well, we dodged a bullet, we're good on that. But there were still a lot of things that could go wrong in Damascus in 2006, 7, and 8 before we left.
Yes, you stand up. Please.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
That's
that's fine.
So I know Meg was in the building with you.
Yes, Elvis and Elvis's wife were in the building. That's right.
It's just a couple questions.
Yeah, there were other tandem couples. She did not work in our office. She worked in another office.
Yeah, so what I'm wondering is, like, how was that for you
because you guys know where each other were during all of this, and like, how did you keep your head in your like professional job, knowing your wife is there, knowing you have a daughter that if something happens, she's parentless, and like, how did you manage that?
So the question is, my wife was also in the building, and how did we communicate, and how did I manage to kind of stay focused on the professional aspect and not, get lost in, oh my God, what's with my wife? And that is an outstanding question, because I did think about that. I thought about it right away, but then I said, I've got to stay focused. I've got to trust the system. As it turns out, about 10 minutes in, or 15 minutes in, about halfway through the thing, one of my colleagues from another office, who I saw in the PCC, mentioned to me that he had been in touch with my wife's office, and everybody was accounted for, everybody was good. So it was a big relief, because I did think about that. But my primary focus had to be on leading the people who were working for me and making the appropriate decisions, the correct decisions with regard to, should we get M4s, or should we do emergency destruct, or should I call DC again? But yeah, it was a balance. There's no doubt about it. I thought about it right away, and then I got caught up in all the stuff I had to do, and I was lucky enough to get word from one of my colleagues. I thought about calling, but I said, these people, everybody's busy. People are under, she's not going to get from under her desk to, oh yeah, what, can you pick up some bread on the way? So, but a difficult question.
A question online. Did the procedures at the embassy change after this attack? Security and so forth?
So the short answer is yes. One of the main points of discussion, along with should we go to voluntary evacuation or forced evacuation or whatever, was lessons learned. We started that afternoon. I remember writing up stuff, lessons learned, and all the offices basically did. So we did change procedures. We got radios up in the PCC. How about that? We did more drills, more realistic drills. And the other interesting point of discussion that often happens after something like this is danger pay. Okay, you've been in a terrorist attack. Should your post, does it merit danger pay? And those discussions were held. The embassy went back to Maine State and said, hey, we blah, 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 because we think we should get danger pay. We never got danger pay, at least when I was there. So.
Okay, thank you so much, Bob, for a very interesting discussion. Now, next month, we're going to go local. Not in Syria, but Jaffrey, and we will have a tag team here with Jeff Crocker and Martha Crocker, who will talk about their experience locally being pioneers. In the case of Martha Crocker, who, as you may know, is a retired judge, being the first woman lawyer admitted to the bar from Cheshire County. I think I've got that right. And in the case of Jeff Crocker, being a member of the first Jewish family in Jaffrey. So they are pioneers of a different type. Come back next month and we will have refreshments.